Welcome back to CDCon Day 2 Keynotes. Kicking off our keynotes today, we have Edith Harbaugh speaking on progressive delivery. Edith is co-founder and CEO of LaunchDarkly. With her keynote on progressive delivery, please welcome Edith Harbaugh.
Hi, I'm here today to talk about progressive delivery, safe at any speed. Progressive delivery means delivering software safely and reliably and at high velocity. And for a lot of the history of software, these ideas have seemed at opposition. There's been this idea that either you deliver something quickly with a lot of risk, or you deliver something slowly but much more safely. And neither are quite right. I think there's a middle ground where you can have the best of both worlds, where you can deliver value quickly to your customers and get that value to them quickly. So who am I? I'm Edith Harbaugh. I'm CEO and co-founder of LaunchDarkly. LaunchDarkly is the leading feature management platform. We deliver trillions of features every day to customers like Atlassian, IBM, and Intuit. My background is I got a BS in engineering at Harvey Med College and then was an engineer designing big content management systems. And as part of that, I got several patents on deployment about how to move components between testing, staging, and production. After several years as an engineer, I wanted to get closer to customers. So then I was a product manager. Most recently, I was at TripIt, which had millions of users. So from this, you can see that I'm really passionate about building software, about the right patterns to build software. This is me in front of the Bay Bridge in Oakland, one of my favorite bridges in the world. So the tools for software are still pretty new. Software as a field is about 60 years old. When my great-grandfather was in college, he got a degree in civil engineering. This is a picture of him as his graduating class in 1905 from Purdue. He went on to become a bridge engineer, and this is one of the bridges he worked on as a structural engineer. So there were patterns that they had been using at that point for thousands and thousands of years to build bridges. You can look at the way he built a bridge as he got requirements. In his case, he got them from the architect because he was a structural engineer. He then put together the bridge. People built the bridge. They verified that it worked, and then you had maintenance. So it was a pretty set pattern. We would now call this a waterfall pattern. The idea was that once you build a bridge, it's going to last for, not just a year or a decade, but hopefully hundreds of years as a reliable way to get people from point A to point B. This is my grandfather, Robert Harbaugh. So he grew up in the 1930s. This is him as a young guy, and he actually dropped out of high school. He dropped out of high school in 1942 to join the U.S. Army Air Corps. The Air Force did not exist back then. So when he was at training school, and he loved telling me this story, by the way. When he was at training school to be a pilot, he was up in the air, and, he told me that, he kind of had a disastrous test flight. He survived it, which in hindsight is pretty amazing. And he landed, and, not only was the landing terrible, but, even on the ground, he just wasn't very good. And the story that he still told was, his flight instructor just, giving him a terrible hard time. It was like, Harbaugh, you are an incredibly bad pilot. Not only are you terrible in the air, on the ground, you don't even know what you're doing. You can't even get the plane to the terminal. It's just like driving a car on the ground. And my grandfather looked at the flight instructor and he said, I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and I dropped out of high school. And I grew up in Pittsburgh in the Depression. I have never driven a car. I don't know how that works. So I guess you could take from this that my grandfather was a pretty much fly by the seat of the pants kind of guy. He said he got then moved over to become a navigator and successfully, navigated his way through, even after never flying a plane ever. So after World War II ended, my grandfather went to school on the GI Bill, and he got a degree in engineering also. His job then was that he would go to rural areas and help them with their first telephone system. There's still places that didn't really have a telephone system yet. All the major towns and cities did, but there would be a little hamlet that didn't have them. So his job was to go there and set it up. It was hard though, because, there's no way to tell people without a telephone that you're coming there to set up their telephone. So he told a story of once, he showed up in a small town, and when I say town, it was just like about group of houses all together. And usually somebody would volunteer to host him for a couple days while he needed to be there. When he got to this town, nobody wanted to host him. He was a stranger. They're like, well, we don't really have room for you, sorry. And my grandfather said, that's fine. I understand that. I'll go to the next town and set up the telephones there. And I guess you'll have to wait, I don't know how long, for you to get telephones. And then all of a sudden somebody's like, well, you know what? I do have a spare room you could stay in. So he was a real problem solver. He didn't wait for a set of requirements. He was pretty much like, I'm gonna solve this stuff as it comes up. You might say that he was more about agile or continuous delivery. He was pretty much like, I'm going to go try to do something. I'm going to test and learn. I'm going to keep going until I figured it out. So, to go back to this continuous cycle, I'm in this town. I don't have a place to stay. Maybe I could say I need a room and they'll give me a place, or I'm in the air. I'm not sure how to fly. And maybe I'll get through this. Very much a figure it out kind of guy. And then there's my mom. My mom is an amazing person. She was just elected to the IEEE Board of Governors. She is completely passionate about software, and she writes standards for software. This is an actual standard that she works on. And she is, again, very much kind of like a designer. This idea that you can have a system in the world that makes everything work. So then there's me. I like to think that there's both sides of like this idea that you can make everything fit in a rigid system. And then there's also kind of this idea in software that is always a little bit of fly in the seat of your pants. Like there's always going to be a little bit of like, I'm not quite sure where I'm going to go with this. But I need to have the best of both worlds of some sort of discipline and some sort of idea where I'm going. So the 80s really preached this gospel of waterfall. Let's write down everything in these big, huge books, and then software pops out 5 years later. Where that really started to break down was that the world could change really quickly in 5 years. Software that's designed for a world 5 years ago could be completely irrelevant today. So there was really this need for continuous delivery. Facebook, Netflix really popularized this idea of like, hey, instead of trying to plan in these 5-year or even 3-year planning cycles, let's have a system where we can ship stuff maybe every month, maybe every week, maybe every day. And that allowed them to be a lot more responsive to their customers' needs. However, continuous delivery is pretty intimidating if you're in an enterprise. If you're in an enterprise, maybe you don't want to ship every day. Maybe you have customers that need training. Maybe you have different regions where you have regulatory requirements. Maybe you just need to get all your marketing materials lined up so that you can actually have a release. So continuous delivery was seen as a very scary thing, and that a lot of business processes just aren't set up for this. So from all this came progressive delivery. So to go back to the bridge metaphor, progressive delivery is the idea that you can roll stuff out when you want to. This is the reconstruction of the Bay Bridge. I talked before about how bridges would last for, decades or hundreds of years. What happened in the Bay Bridge was that part of it collapsed as part of an earthquake. They were trying to shore up, and they finally realized that they actually needed to build a new bridge. So you can see them trying to build the new bridge parallel with the old bridge. While this was being built, they had to keep both bridges running. You can't just say, hey, we're going to knock down a whole bridge and build a foot every night and everybody wait for the new bridge. So this goes along with the idea of progressive delivery. Adjusting the number of users able to see and are impacted by new features at a pace appropriate to your business. So what they did with the Bay Bridge is they said, hey, we're going to build this new bridge, and when it's ready, we'll start putting people over. There's a lot of the same things that you can apply to software. If you're doing a major change to your software, for example, a radical change to the UI, you might want to only put that out to a certain number of people. Another idea is if you are impacted by regulations, for example, if you're a financial institution and you're working in different countries in Europe, you might have very different things that you could push out anytime to different regions. Delegation is the step after that. Delegation is the idea that you can control by a business user who gets that code when. This is all based on the fact that you can separate out deployment from release. So with progressive delivery, what we're trying to do is say, instead of having this big code base that everybody sees all at once, we're going to carefully section up pieces of code and then chunk them out to the right person at the right time. So let's talk about some of those use cases. The ones closest to developers are around testing and production and multi-state management. Testing and production is really not as scary as it sounds. Charity Majors talks a lot about this, and I'll give her a lot of credit. Charity Majors, the founder of Honeycomb, that's like everybody has a testing server. Sometimes it's different than production. Testing and production means pushing all your code out and then very carefully turn it on for different people and different use cases with this ability to turn it off immediately if something is not right. That is incredibly liberating because the old way of having to push stuff out to everybody is terrifying. I call that the push and pray release, where you've pushed everything out and you're just crossing your fingers like, have I tested everything? And the answer usually is no. And even if you have tested everything, things are going to be pretty different in production. It's very common to have backend systems that are impossible to stub out. It's pretty common to have integrations that there are no way to fully test. It's pretty common to have scalability that you might have thought you tested completely in an internal system, but just act completely different in the real world. So the freedom of testing in production is the confidence that I'm actually getting real production data, and also that I could just stop it. And then that gets the next thing, which is a kill switch. By separating out testing in the real world carefully, you could turn off anything that's not working. Instead of having to roll a release in a hurry, you just stop the thing that's not working. That sounds really fun. It's really fun to be able to say, hey, this thing's not working, let's just stop it, rather than I need to get 20 of my engineers, including the 2 that are on vacation, to figure out how to patch this and worry about whether or not the patch is going to break something else. Along with that, a safety valve is really a good way to go about progressive delivery. A safety valve is the ability to slowly ramp up traffic to something. I've been talking a lot about financial use cases because this is, again, a really powerful use case for progressive delivery. If you're worried about flooding some backend system, you can put slowly over time 5%, 10%, 20%, 30% of traffic to that backend system. If you find that the system is not scaling, if there's something that's brittle, if there's something that's breaking, you can just turn it back down to 0. This is much more reliable and safe than putting 100% of traffic to something and having it overwhelm a system. The classic overwhelming is if you have so many errors that your error logging system actually starts to go haywire and can bring everything down. So a safety valve is a really nice way to relieve a lot of stress and also to test when you're ready for it. Product could use dark launches. They can turn something that you can launch a feature completely off, and then a product manager could turn it on for different people selectively. These different people might be people who've been who voluntarily said like, hey, I want this new feature. They might be people who you're a little bit concerned about whether the new experience will be something they like. Again, you can always turn it off if they don't like it. A synchronized launch is something that marketing really craves. If you've ever worked on something that has an East Coast release time at 8 a.m. and you're on the West Coast, what that usually means is your engineers are up at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. to make sure the launch is going to go live. With progressive delivery, you could have actually deployed all that software a week or two ago, tested it and made sure that everything works. Maybe even turn it on for a couple people in the press, a day or two ahead of time. And then when it's time to launch, it's just a matter of just flipping the switch. It's already there. You don't have to worry about deployment. Some of customers of LaunchDarkly who are using this method say that suddenly releases are boring. And I love that. That instead of a release being a stressful thing of, oh my God, like, does this code work? The release itself is boring. You already know that the code works. All you have to do is sit back and enjoy all the, the kudos and fun times of saying how nice these new features are. We have a lot of customers who are in the entertainment and streaming releases who are using this when they're like, this thing absolutely needs to be live at this certain time, and we cannot risk it being down. Even sales and customer success can get involved in progressive delivery. If you have something that you want a customer to try out, a salesperson, instead of having to open a ticket and saying, hey, can you turn on a trial for so-and-so in Illinois, a sales or customer success person with proper delegation can just turn it on. And finally, there's a lot of fun things that data science can do. With features properly segmented, a data scientist person can examine how that feature is being used, get analytics around it, and really understand its usage. And again, this all comes back to encapsulated features nicely so that you could go through this progressive release where you can turn them on one by one and have controls over who has the ability to turn them on, who has the ability to turn them off. So the heart of this all is, again, deploying when you want, releasing when your customer is ready. Instead of having to mash them together and saying we have these huge releases with everything a customer might want, and if they don't like it, there's no way to control it, carefully segmenting out what people want and then delivering at the right time. So this is the Bay Bridge. It's completed. It is one of my favorite bridges because I live in Oakland. And I think it really shows the power of progressive delivery. So if you have only one takeaway from this, it's that it's not an either or with continuous delivery. It's not continuous delivery is dangerous or we go back to Waterfall. It's that we can have both. We can have safe releases that help our customers and help us move quickly. If you're interested in learning more, go to our website at www.launchdarkly.com. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks.